On this, the 105th episode of What the Ship, we look at the top 5 maritime stories. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So we have been doing this for a while now. Take the 5 top maritime stories, package them together so that you can understand global shipping. Well, we're a little late in getting this episode out because there has been a shipload of ship stuff happening around the world. Try to say that a few times fast. We're going to try to cover the top 5 stories and also do some recaps on some previous stories we've reported on. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new episodes as they come out. All right, let's head over to Charleston, South Carolina. So our first recap is on the MSC Michigan 7. You may remember the Michigan 7 after its epic 15-knot run down the Cooper River, out of control, unable to throttle back down. The vessel subsequently came back into port for investigation and repairs, but it has since been arrested. That's right, you can actually arrest vessels. And in this case, Carver Maritime, a breakbulk organization in the port of Charleston, issued a lien against the MSC Michigan 7 for damages done to its facilities. It's estimated that about $500,000 worth of damage was done by the wake of the MSC Michigan 7. So the vessel is still being held currently in the port of Charleston waiting to resolve that claim. You may remember back in February, we reported on a barge that sank off the island of Tobago. There's a very controversial issue and video because of the way I pronounced Tobago, which was incorrect based on everyone who ever watched that video. However, we've learned more about the owner and the tug and barge. So back in February 7th, a oil slick appeared off the island, and it was traced back to a tug, the Solo Creed, and a barge, the Gulfstream. The Gulfstream was carrying about 35,000 barrels of oil from Venezuela. This is a 48-year-old barge that capsized off the coast. The cleanup is estimated to cost up to $23.5 million so far. An investigation by several news agencies, including the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian and Bellingcat, a Dutch journalism group, basically tracked down this vessel. They identified the tug, which was actually arrested in Angola on May 11th. They've been able to identify that ownership of the tug and barge laid with Abraham Olaf Khan of Nigeria, and efforts are being made to get restitution. A story we have not reported on but has a lot of attraction is the grounding and loss of Fiji's brand new patrol boat on its very first patrol. This vessel, the RFNS Pall Mall, was built by Australia under Austell and given as a gift from the government of Australia to Fiji. Well, the vessel had subsequently ran aground on its maiden voyage. The ship is taking water and looks to be in obvious trouble and distress. Not exactly clear whether or not the ship will be saved. Another story involved the Laker Michipicoten, a 72-year-old Canadian Laker that suffered a hull crack. It was believed initially the vessel may have struck something, but instead what we have identified is the ship suffered a hull stress fracture about 13 feet in length. The ship was able to navigate its way back into Thunder Bay in Canada on Lake Superior. About half the crew was evacuated from the vessel. Cargo has since been offloaded to another bulker. A patch has been affixed to the ship. One of the reasons you operate vessels so long on the Great Lakes is the fresh water that just does not corrode the vessel like salt water does. Canada, along with the United States, operate fairly old vessels. Canada has since repealed its cabotage laws, so they're allowed to bring in foreign-built and foreign-crewed vessels. However, the older vessels still remain as long as they can make money. Let's go ahead to our first story, which deals with the Houthi attacks in and around the region of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and everybody's favorite, the Bab el-Mandab. There are 2 vessels that have been abandoned due to attacks perpetrated by the Houthi. The first is the Greek-owned, Liberian-flagged bulk carrier MV Tutor, which had sailed from Russia. It was heading to India with a load of ore on board. The ship was attacked by the Houthis, specifically an unmanned surface vessel. This is basically a modified remote control boat with a large warhead attached to it. This is an image of Tutor low in the water aft. We believe that it was hit back in the engine room. This has caused the vessel to start losing its buoyancy. One of the few areas of reserve buoyancy on a bulk carrier is the engine space, and that is currently being flooded. U.S. Navy forces have assisted in the evacuation of the crew off the vessel, and one crew member has been reportedly lost and killed on board, a Filipino. Concurrently, another vessel, this time a Palau-flagged vessel, which is Ukrainian-operated, sailing from Malaysia to Italy with wood on board, has also been evacuated. The vessel is on fire and potentially sinking. This means that we're seeing the first sinking of vessels since the loss of Ruby Mar months ago. A significant uptick going on with Houthi attacks against shipping. Just did a whole video on this about a potential change of strategy that the Navy should be thinking about regarding convoy. But here I want to talk more about the impact on global shipping. So one of the aspects we're seeing that this is causing is because of the elongated shipping routes that ships have to go. This story over in Maritime Executive, Red Sea diversions are causing port congestion in Singapore. It's estimated we're seeing about 2 million containers piled up in Singapore right now. It is the seafarers who are bearing the brunt of rising aggression from the Houthis. The Houthis are saying they're doing these attacks because of what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. Yet they're perpetrating horrors and attacks against innocent mariners in the same vein. And I don't understand how they equate the two. Why is it committing one illegal act nullify the other illegal act? But what we're seeing happen right now is nations are taking note of this. In particular, the Philippines, who provide the bulk of the world's mariners, are reviewing seafarer work rules as these Houthi attacks continue. In particular, what is being done to protect these mariners, what insurance is being provided for them should they be hurt or wounded, what protection is there for their families if a mariner's life is lost. All these need to be examined and relooked at. In the meantime, some of the major ocean carriers, in particularly CMA CGM, very quietly have resumed service through this region. This is a report from Linerlytica back in May, where CMA CGM resumed Suez traffic from Asia to the Mediterranean via their Phoenician Express service. This is the Phoenician Express service as advertised by CMA CGM. It operates from East Asia via the Red Sea up into the Mediterranean region. They have 11 vessels on here with 15 ports of call. It operates weekly with a duration of 77 days. And if you pull up the ships identified on it, you can see that service is underway. You'll notice those kind of dotted lines here running through the region. That has to do with the fact that ships are turning off their AIS once they're clearing the Straits of Malacca in and around Colombo in Sri Lanka, and then turning them on again when they're in the Mediterranean, clearing the area. And one of the reasons that this is being done is because the French Navy, the Marine Nationale, is providing escorts for these vessels. This story over on the War Zone, French frigate captain describes the frantic Red Sea combat. This is from the captain of the French frigate Alsace that was doing some of this. They have replaced the frigate Alsace with an air defense destroyer. The French Navy vessel Forbin is now there, a much more robust vessel able to do better air defense. It's actually designed to provide air defense for their aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle. And so the French are doing a much more kind of concentrated effort to allow CMA CGM, even though these aren't always French flag vessels, they are French owned vessels, to navigate through this area and maintain a service, something that other navies are trying to do. The Italians are doing it with some of their shipping lines, but interestingly enough, the U.S. is not doing it with U.S. flagged ships. There's also reports being done about this. The DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, just published a report on this. Yemen Houthi attacks placing pressure on international trade. I have to say that I hope the DIA's analysis is better than what they released. I understand this is an unclassed version of their report, but it was solely lacking in details, analysis. Plus, it only went up to March of this year. If you really want to see the impact of the attacks, I again always recommend head over to the Washington Institute site. Series of reports on this, interactive maps with charts, with data. I think the Washington Institute is doing a much better job at tracking this, at least for open source intelligence, than almost any other group that's out there. The impact of the Red Sea is amazing. Again, here is a non-state actor, and I keep calling them a non-state actor because while the Houthi may control the majority of Yemen and they may have the capital of Yemen, they are not recognized as the government of Yemen by nearly any country in the world out there. And yet they are illegally, and I'm going to say it again, illegally attacking vessels on the high seas. They have no right, none, to stop ships from transiting through international waters. These ships are not stopping in Yemen waters. They're not calling into Yemen waters. They are sailing through an international waterway, which under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea cannot be interdicted. And yet that is exactly what the Houthi are doing. And either the US, the French, the British, and all the other nations of the world have to make a cognizant decision here. Are they going to prevent the Houthi from doing this? Or are they just going to give up this region and allow the Houthi to close it down and cause massive impacts on global shipping? Again, I understand the reason behind the Houthi doing it. They're upset over what Israel is doing in Gaza. Many people are upset over what Israel is doing in Gaza. Also, many people are upset for what Hamas did in Gaza to the Israeli people. There is two sides to every argument in a conflict. However, it doesn't do any good to attack vessels and crews that have nothing, and I mean nothing, to do with this. Again, a ship carrying wood from Malaysia to Italy and a vessel carrying ore from Russia to India, what has that got to do with Israel? And that is the scope of what we're seeing. All right, let's go ahead and jump over to our next story. This story by Mike Scholler over in G Captain. Container spot rates set to rise further. We have been seeing this uptick in the short-term rates, the spot rates going from Asia to around the world. We're seeing it tick up much higher. Again, we saw that big spike initially happen, then it began to come back down, but now it's back up and it actually has exceeded the level initially caused by the Houthi. So we're seeing that Zentia is talking about the rise from Far East to West Coast, expected to rise by 4.8%, reaching $6,178 per 40-foot equivalent unit. This story from Lodestar, the spot rates rise slow, but Asia med rates look set to hit $20,000, says analysts. Again, that Asia to med rate is one of the biggest. It's the longest route because now cargo has to go all the way around Africa, through the terminals at Tangier in Morocco or Algeciras in Spain, and then be sent via feeder service around the Mediterranean. It's one of the reasons why CGM is trying to push a weekly service now through the Red Sea, because they can make a lot of money if they can get a guaranteed set rate going through that region and assure a reliability of delivery. Meanwhile, in the United States, we're seeing trade begin to slow at Southern California ports. Both LA and Long Beach are experiencing declines in those regions, and that is a twofold reason why it's happening. Number one, the Panama Canal is getting its water back. We're seeing a rise in the level of the canal, meaning that we're seeing a restoration in the number of ships going through and an increase in the draft of vessels going through, so you can bypass LA and Long Beach, take those Neo-Panamax ships through that large lane of the Panama Canal and deliver it directly. And at the same time, those containers that are on those ultra large container ships are using those big terminals in Algeciras and Tangiers and over in Rotterdam and Felixstowe, and they're putting them on ships that are then going across the Atlantic to the United States. One of the things I've been talking about a little bit, I'm going to be working on a video that talks about this, is the potential development for a new container terminal in Brazil that would be a big feeder service for those ultra-large container vessels coming around Africa to feed into the Americas. China right now, COSCO is developing a port on the west coast of South America in Peru. This would be another venue for them to look at. Concurrent with all the issues we're seeing in the container service, we still have that issue with a potential looming strike on the East Coast with the International Longshoremen's Association and the U.S. Maritime Alliance. Dock workers are seeking wage increases commensurate with corporate profits. We had a walkout of the negotiations between the ILA and the USMX that largely had to do with issues of using automated gates down in Mobile, Alabama, but the underlying issue has to do with an increase of wages for the union workers because the container companies, which make up a large portion of the USMX, are kind of holding off on pay raises when they have suffered these great profits recently. At the same time, we're seeing impacts here on a regional basis. India, who has been seeing their cargo now have to bypass the Red Sea, have to go around Africa. Well, they're facing new surcharges as capacity to Europe tightens. This is having a really negative impact on India, which had been increasing its amount of freight going to Europe and back, now has to go a distance that's almost 3 times as long as previously. That shortcut right through the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, the Bab el-Mandeb, is money for India to get through. But now they got to go 3 times that distance. That's having a huge impact for them. All right, let's go ahead and jump over to our next story. 2 stories came out this week that I thought were really reflective of what's going on in the cruise industry. First story comes out of Bloomberg over at GCAP. Greece to cap number of cruise ship at its most popular islands. So the Prime Minister of Greece is looking to put a cap on the number of vessels that can visit Greece's most popular islands. Now, this is big money for Greece. Greece welcomed 32.7 million tourists in 2023, 18% more than the year before. And the first quarter has seen a 25% rise in this. Cruises generated 847.4 million euros in revenue last year, more than double the 2022 figure. However, it has a major negative impact on certain islands. Santorini, for example, is just not able to accommodate this huge influx. When these massive cruise ships arrive, they can overawe a island's infrastructure in terms of restaurants, transportation, just basically it's too many people. And so one of the things that Greece is trying to do is improve its ability to schedule these mega cruise vessels from coming in, plus their environmental impact that they do have. They bring in a lot of not just people, but they burn a lot of fuel. They're always under power when they're off the coast because they're usually at anchor, and therefore they create pollution in and around the area. So a major issue. And understand, Greece is not alone with this. We've seen this going on in Venice, for example. We've seen it in islands throughout the Caribbean. One of the issues has been whenever an island or a port does this, the fear is they're going to drive business away and go someplace else. However, what we're beginning to see here is more and more ports are embracing this. And that is a problem for the cruise industry because eventually they'll run out of ports. They can make their own artificial ports like some cruise lines do in islands in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, and off the coast of Haiti. However, if you want to get into these largely tourist areas, especially in and around the Mediterranean, the North Sea, the Baltic, the Caribbean, then you're going to have to adjust to what these countries want. The second story, a really interesting one, is the first mega cruise ship built for short cruises delivered to Royal Caribbean. Now, coastal cruising is not new, and this is not coastal cruising. This is a much different issue. So this story, Royal Caribbean International took delivery of its second mega cruise ship in 2024. The Utopia of the Sea is unique as she is the first of the largest class of cruise ships to be deployed on delivery into short weekend cruise markets. So 236,000 gross tons. A gross ton is a measure of volume, not displacement. It's about 40 cubic feet per ton, as much as 50% larger than the Freedom class, With a passenger capacity of 5,668 people in lower berths and 2,834 cabins, the new ship will carry 20% more passengers. Now, CEO of Royal Caribbean, Jason Liberty, said this: taking delivery of Utopia of the Sea is an incredibly important milestone as it marks yet another evolution of our game-changing ships and our mission to create the best vacation experience reasonably. The ship features a broader array of amenities ranging from 5 swimming pools to water slides, including one that is 43 feet longer. Goes on down here. So Mike Bailey, the president and CEO of Royal Caribbean International, said this: with the delivery of Utopia of the Sea, we have the keys to the ultimate weekend. This is a short vacation that packs every way to make amazing memories in a 3-night weekend or a 4-night weekend getaway. Understand what Royal Caribbean is doing here is by designing a ship that's going out for a shorter period of time. That means that's less stores, food, booze, everything you need on board, less. That means less storerooms, less logistics on board the ship, and you can maximize your passengers on board. What they're doing is they're trading endurance for capacity. And so these ships are designed for short weekends, short, 3 to 4 day outings, not the long 7 to 10 days where you have to restock all the time and kind of put all that gear on board. And that's a very interesting proposition they're taking. As they're putting more passengers on board, what are they doing in terms of safety on board? That's always my question when it comes to a cruise ship. Now, I am not against cruising at all. Matter of fact, I'm heading out on a cruise myself this summer. And one of the first things I do when I go on a ship is look for my way to egress off the ship. And I do it by life raft. You all can go to lifeboats. I'm going to a life raft. I'll see you later. I am not getting into one of those lifeboats with everybody else. I know how to launch a life raft. I am all set to go in a life raft in a minute. But there is an issue about this. As we try to maximize the number of people afloat, what is Royal Caribbean and all the shipping lines doing about this? It's a really interesting endeavor what Royal Caribbean is doing in changing the interior of this vessel to accommodate it. And it's purely monetary. And if you look at Royal Caribbean in particularly, there are 3 major cruise lines out there: Royal Caribbean, there's Norwegian, and there is, of course, Carnival. And yeah, there are other cruise lines underneath their banners, but those are the 3 big corporate ones. They control about 80% of all the cruise lines out there. And if you look at them, they're all going at different ways to do it. Royal Caribbean stock has backed up way over where it was pre-2000. They have boomed back, and it's because of a lot of sound ideas and management. Carnival, Norwegian is trying to get back up to where they were. They had to do a lot of things because of the downturn due to COVID on board. Had to take some loans and get some money. They had to sell some assets. But Royal Caribbean has been the one that has really been leading the charge here. And so this is an interesting endeavor in the cruise ship sector. All right, let's go ahead and jump over to our next story. Our next story deals with shipbuilding. The 3 largest shipbuilders in the world, representing almost 95% of all the world's ships, are China, South Korea, and Japan. That's it. There's that little area right there, that kind of 1,000 miles right around Okinawa right there, is where 95% of all shipbuilding is done, with China being the overwhelming majority there. Nearly 50% of all shipbuilding is done in and around in China. But what we're seeing is a big change in shipbuilding right now. This story over in Maritime Executive: new building prices reach highest level in 16 years, driven by strong orders. So after years of downturn, soft decade throughout most of the 2010s, the industry trade group BIMCO reports shipbuilding prices are reaching new heights. Overall order prices are up to the highest point since 2008, having increased a further 3% in 2024. Now, a lot of this has to do with the orders placed in 2021 and 2022 for container ships. When the container liners were flush with cash because of the high profitability and the higher freight rates, they took a lot of that money and they started buying new ships. I mean, when you give a drunken sailor money, they're going to spend it. According to Niels Rasmussen over at BIMCO, he points to this resurgence in orders as helping to drive up prices. The global order book highlights has grown 72% since 2020. Goes on down here. Shipyards' global order book currently stands at 133 million compensated gross tons, as an increase of 66 million from the low of 2020. So far this year, the tanker and LNG segments combined have been the main drivers of growth in the global order book. We're seeing LNG and tankers on an uptick. We've seen that money increase there in terms of shipping, but there is a finite amount of LNG and tankers, and so therefore those companies are spending money. BIMCO highlights that LNG and container ships have accounted for respectively 35 and 30% of the increase, while bulk carriers, tankers, and LPG occupy the rest. They also highlight that the shipbuilding industry was plagued by overcapacity in the last decade. Prices during the 2010s, they reported, only varied plus or minus 10% from the price's median period. Between 2010 and 2020, Rasmussen calculates that the median order book versus capacity ratio was 2.2, declining to 1.7 in the second half of 2017. This improvement has helped fuel the price increase. Don't forget, too, a lot of shipping that's being built has these new fuels, LNG fuel, ammonia, methanol, all the different types of interim fuels are being utilized right now. This year's order have exceeded the forecast from many analysts who expected a slower pace versus the past few. One of the nations that benefited greatly by this is South Korea. However, there are problems with this. One of the things you have to be careful to note right now is, as the order book extends out, we have seen the reduction in shipyard capacity, not just in the United States, but globally. We are down about 60% in number of shipyards around the world since 2008. That reduction has to do with consolidation of shipyards. Shipyards have gotten bigger. They have bought up each shipyard. For example, the CSSC, the Chinese State Shipbuilding Corporation, builds 20% of the world ships. That's how big that shipyard is. It's not one single shipyard, it's a series of shipyards. But that shows you the growth. The other aspect here is some issues regarding orders. The story also from Maritime Executive. Samsung says Russia's Vedya illegally terminated $4 billion shipbuilding deal. So a lot of this has to deal with U.S. sanctions against Russia. Goes on here, Samsung Heavy Industries wrote in a stock exchange filing, the Russian client unilaterally claimed that the contract was not fulfilled during a negotiation process. Since the contract termination notice is illegal, we plan to file a complaint with the Singapore Arbitration Court to dispute the illegality of the contract termination and scope of return. Now, Samsung has been working with this company for a long time. The total contracts called for 22 vessels with a combined value of $5.7 billion. And when you look at the contract, it was looking at 10 LNG carriers and 7 shuttle tankers. These ships are now not being built for Russia, and they will be available for purchase if Russia doesn't come through. We've talked about this a lot. The Russian government, under these sanctions being imposed by the EU, the G7, and all these other countries because of their actions in Ukraine, is having a negative impact on their ability to procure new ships. Russia is heavily dependent, especially on Korea, for their construction, and in particularly LNG tankers. Liquefied natural gas is a big uptick right now. Russians need those LNG carriers. In particularly, a lot of those LNG carriers are ice strengthened, so they can operate in the Arctic region, the very northern region where Russia has a lot of gas fields. Without those vessels, it's going to be a big problem. There's an opportunity there for other shipping companies or other nations to move in and potentially grab those vessels. I think this is a golden opportunity for the United States to grab some LNG carriers, put them into U.S. trade, even talk about maybe a modification of a Jones Act to put 1 or 2 of those vessels in the coastal trade to provide LNG for Puerto Rico, for up into the New England area until LNG tankers can be built in the United States, something the U.S. did in the 70s and 80s, could build them again, just need to get started doing that. Those product tankers would be good ones. The U.S. is facing the block obsolescence of tankers in its fleet. We built a lot of tankers after 1990, the Oil Pollution Act of that year, that required double hull tankers. Those tankers are now getting to be 30 years old, so there needs to be some new construction being done. You can get those tankers on the short term while tanker production ramps up in the United States. So global shipbuilding is in a very interesting position these days. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our last story. The last story is one that's very dear to my heart because it involves the flagship of the U.S. Merchant Marine. This story over in Maritime Executive, the iconic ocean liner SS United States ordered to leave berth by September. The SS United States, the flagship of the U.S. Merchant Marine, longtime holder of the Blue Ribbon for the fastest passage across the Atlantic, has been laid up in Philadelphia for decades. The ship was taken out of service in the 1970s, has been floating around from place to place. It was in Newport News for a long time, went over to Turkey to have asbestos removed. It came back to the United States. It's been laid up in Philadelphia for a long time. And there's been an effort to try to convert the ship into a floating hotel, even talk about returning her back to service. But in truth, very little can be done with the hull of this vessel anymore. And now there is litigation going on for the ship to be off the berth where it currently is in Philadelphia. And it's a traumatic story for me because the SS United States, which has been commanded by a captain from my alma mater, every captain of that ship has been from State University of New York Maritime College. I love every story about the SS United States. And if you want some great stories about SS United States and you want to do some research, 2 books for you. I always love to talk about these. So this book by Stephen Ujifusa, A Man and His Ship, great book. It is about the designer of the vessel. Great book. The subtitle of this book is America's Greatest Naval Architect and His Quest to Build the SS United States. William Francis Gibbs was the Elon Musk of his day, the Henry Ford. Just amazing. This book is amazing. The first half deals with Gibbs in his career, but the second half deals with the SS United States. If you want the tech book that talks all about SS United States, then you need to dig up Frank Brainerd's The Big Ship, the story of the SS United States. Just a great one for it. SS United States in many ways symbolizes the U.S. Merchant Marine. The fact that it's sitting there rusting away in Philadelphia, not moving, is probably a good indication of what has happened to the U.S. Merchant Marine. It's been neglected. It's been basically put away, and people will recognize it once in a while, but there's not much left to do with it. There's a lot of talk about what to do with the SS United States, but I'm one of those who thinks she's past her prime. I don't want to see her scrapped, and my idea is the Viking funeral for her. Take her out to sea, and let's sink her as a reef. I want to cut the funnels off her, put one funnel at State University of New York Maritime College and the other across the river at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, because they're iconic, and the cadets and midshipmen there can maintain those. I think that would be good symbols for the U.S. Merchant Marine. The props are already there. They've taken the propellers off her. She's been stripped of nearly everything in her. It's unrealistic to get her going. She's uneconomical. The engines are too big for her. She's overpowered. I mean, this vessel flew. I did over 40 knots, did 20 knots astern. I mean, just crazy stories about the SS United States. But again, we need to think about the future, not the past. And one of the things I think that the SS United States reminds us of where the U.S. Merchant Marine was. When it was built, it was the very tail end of the program that was done during World War II under the U.S. Maritime Commission. She's the second to last vessel built in that program. But it also marks the end of that program. We need to be looking forward. And one of the things I think we have a hard time doing is looking forward in ways to move ahead. This ship is a massive ship, and I don't say this very lightly. It's just the ship has sat for decades. And I got to tell you, once you leave ships alone for a long period of time, they're almost possible to restore. Ask any museum director about this on a ship. Very difficult. Been watching the restorations on board USS Texas and USS New Jersey as they've been going on. Very expensive, very laborious. Turning her into a floating hotel is going to be tough because they're not very successful. Look at Queen Mary in Long Beach. They just don't do very well. for that. I think she would be a great centerpiece in New York on the west side, for example, at the old piers there, maybe Pier 88. I think that would be fantastic if someone wanted to invest in it, but it'd be a lot of money. And I'm not exactly sure of the profitability of it. But I wanted to share that story because something is about to happen with the SS United States, and not many people know about it and its history. And again, if you want to know more about it, pick up one of these two books. Love Stephen's book. I also like Frank's book too, because I am wonky when it comes to shipping. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. I got to tell you, what's going on with shipping is going on the road. Taking off here later this week for beautiful Kiel, Germany, where I'm going to be speaking at the Kiel International Sea Power Symposium. That's right. You get to talk about shipping on YouTube. You get to talk about the Red Sea, the Black Sea, and that's what I'm going to be talking about there. And the impact the conflicts in those two regions, the Red and the Black Sea, could potentially have on a war on the Blue Seas. I'll keep you posted on this and let you know about the event, and probably be doing a little live streaming on the road. Until our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.